Good afternoon from our studio in Amsterdam. Today, I'm extremely excited. We have Kumar Grog. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. Um, and he is the founder of Renaissance Philanthropy, which is really quite an amazing organization. Kumar, for those that don't know you and don't know Renaissance Philanthropy, who are you? What is your journey that led to this? What is Renaissance Philanthropy and what is your big purpose?
Well, wonderful to have to be on and to be joining you. Yeah, so I guess the story starts, I was born in India, um, and then grew up, spent a couple years in England, and then grew up in the suburbs of New York. I ended up studying political science and computer science in school, and was uh, after graduate school, ended up on a fellowship in the Obama administration. So I ended up in the
Hmm.
science office, working for President Obama's science advisor. And, that ended up being the big thing that has shaped a lot of my work since. One of the things I got to see up close is just how does the US kind of like the miracle that is the US science and tech enterprise actually operate across all the agencies that fund science, the incredible science institutions like the universities, the tech companies, and others, and how do we then invest and build in this engine and create the breakthroughs? One of the things I remember when I first showed up is there was a big debate going on about the future of commercial space. So, the space program had been sort of struggling along post Challenger, where, you know, we had we had no big prospects for getting back to the moon or to go further, budgets flat, lots of kind of risk. And there's a big question around whether the US government should actually be trying to widen the set of performers. And then there was a small company called SpaceX that was trying to
Oh,
get a
okay.
NASA contract
What, what
back.
what year was that?
So I showed up in 2009, and SpaceX had just signed a multi-year milestone payment program with NASA. But this was wildly controversial. So we were getting hit from both sides, Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, for commercial space being something that was going to, potentially cost lives,
Mm.
as well as waste a lot of money. But, President Obama stuck to his guns and said, we should be widening who's working in this area. And that bet of then betting on this commercial space sector, you sort of fast forward now, 15 years later, the US is in a dominant position when it comes to space, partly because of flagship companies like SpaceX that we bet on back then. So it just gave me this healthy sense that, there are important decisions that we can make to actually will the future forward. Um, so I did that. I worked for President Obama for many years, all the way till the end of his administration. And then I went to work with Eric Schmidt and helped
Oh.
build out his science and tech philanthropy. And there it was, in some ways similar in the sense of what are the right ways that we're betting on science and tech, but with a different vantage point of, writing much smaller checks, but being much earlier on ideas. So, we were betting on how can AI improve climate science or how can AI have an impact on education many years before ChatGPT. And then 2 years ago, I spun out and created a new organization called Renaissance Philanthropy, where the idea was to work with not just one donor, but a variety of donors, all on science and tech. And the theory behind it was just that, there's a lot of interest in science and technology when it comes to folks.
Sure.
But it's hard, finding compelling ideas, figuring out what the bottleneck is a real problem. And it actually keeps a lot of donors on the sidelines. So can we actually build compelling programs? We call them thesis-driven funds, where each fund has a 3 to 5 year thesis, the problem is trying to solve, a technical lead, and then we almost treat the donors like LPs. They're putting philanthropic money to work inside the fund, and then the fund goes off and does grants, contracts, all sorts of things to then work on the KPI that it's set. So we've been around 2 years. I've been having good success. Have, a couple dozen funds, have either directly or indirectly moved around $500 million. into various science and tech programs. So, and then, have been continue to sort of build out in a variety of different topics across AI, energy and climate, global development, human health, and economic and social mobility.
You've raised $500 million in 2 years and actually allocated that money.
So we track two different numbers. One is money that comes into the organization for our funds and programs. So that's a little north of 250 million. And then we track another number, which is just money where we have given a recommendation to a donor on
Ah, I
something
see.
existing that they should write a check to. Because for us, it's important to, we don't want to make everything into a nail just because we have a hammer. Just because we build
Right.
fund, we also want to be able to make high quality recommendations. So we made $250 million plus in recommendations. And so we track both those numbers, direct and advisory, and those have added up to 500 million. But yeah, it's been way faster than we expected. And then of those funds we've raised, we're in a deployment cycle. So some of our funds, have been totally deployed. Like, we raised money for an AI for math fund, and then we expended that first raise right away in giving out grants to researchers all over the world. Now we're doing a second round. So there's always a little bit of a lag from when we raise the money to when we deploy it because, we do an RFP or something else. But the goal is to get the money out the door. Uh,
So
as soon as we
you're advising other donors and other foundations, or do they come to you, hey, somebody knocked on our door. I can't really figure it out. Is it real or is it defying physics? Can you help us on it? Is that your role?
So our primary role is to actually uh, do the end-to-end program. So not just give advice, but like,
Okay,
let's say somebody says, I'm really interested in how AI can transform physics.
right.
We might go off and think hard about that and then say, oh, actually, there is a good program in this area. It would have these components, it would have this goal. We've identified the right technical lead. All you need to do is write a check, and then we will
Okay.
run this fully designed program that we have built.
For one donor, for one donor.
Well, we design it where it could be for a donor, but often the donor is just an anchor and then we raise from other donors. The whole point is, since we work with a variety of donors, we don't need to be limited by a single donor's. It's built around what is the thesis of the fund. So a lot of our funds might start with an anchor donor and then we attract other donors. Some of them are single donor where a donor is fully covering the cost of the fund. So that's our primary work. But then, with a lot of these donors that we talk to, they sometimes do want advice as well, where they say, you know, hey, I want to make these biomedical research grants. Which of these different research projects do you think is really high value? Or,
Mm.
you know, I'm really interested in this area. Who's doing good work? And we will make recommendations of existing things that exist uh, that they should know about. And then we track if they then follow our advice and then write a grant to those organizations.
And these are all grants for profits or nonprofits that are receiving the money.
Yeah, so we will write, so the money that comes into the organization is always philanthropic. So we
Okay.
raise money philanthropically. So we don't give any returns back to the donors. It's just a straight gift into the organization. Once it arrives in the organization, we leave it up to the fund lead for how do they want to deploy it. Do they want to deploy it as a grant? Do they want to deploy it as a contract? Do they want to deploy it as an investment? And then do
Oh,
they
you
want to,
do also investments. Oh, okay.
yeah, so we just don't give the returns back to the donors.
Right.
So
Okay.
we can cycle forward if the return into like it could be like an evergreen fund, that kind of thing. And then whether they are writing it to researchers, whether they're writing it to nonprofits, whether they're writing it to companies, depends. So in our, we run this thing called the tools competition, which is on the intersection of AI and education. That competition gives out checks, but it is writing checks to companies and it's writing checks to nonprofits. And so we try to be agnostic on form. Sometimes the best idea sits within a company, then we want to figure out how to support that. Sometimes the best idea sits within a research lab. Sometimes the best idea sits within an individual that doesn't have an affiliation. And so we want to be able to write different types of checks to all the different types of organizations. And so we leave it up to the fund lead for how they want to structure it. But yeah, we can write investment checks as well as grants and contracts.
And what would be 250 million? And then the other, it's a lot of money. So what is your kind of sweet spot in ticket size that you're helping? Because you're doing really early stage, correct? Not late stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think um, in general, we don't have that many checks we're writing that are north of a couple $1 million per check.
That's still a lot of
Uh,
money.
but we have lots of some of our programs are writing checks at the 50K, 100K,
Oh,
200.
okay.
So we have a range. It depends a lot on what the structure of the program is. So for example, in our AI for Math fund, and you know, the goal of that fund is how can we accelerate the development of AI tools that accelerate the day-to-day work of top mathematicians? So how can we accelerate the pace of the productivity of top mathematicians using AI and build this field that sits between AI and math? So our main open call that we do to researchers and technologists, you know, can give grants all the way up to $1 million. So we gave away, um, close to, 15 to 16 million. So it was across, 30 awards, all of them between 500,000 to 1 million. Um, but then this year, for our second round of that program, we actually built a smaller track for what you would consider basically like pilot grants. So
Mm.
these are under 200, under $150,000, and we write them much more quickly for emerging ideas and writing those more quickly. So, we'll straddle based on maturity and speed, whereas like our open call we do once a year. Um, and so, yeah, it depends a lot. So, like our tools competition on AI and education, we
Mm.
actually write checks at many different levels based on maturity of idea. So, is it a $100,000 check? Is it a $150,000 check? Is it a $250,000 check? And you're eligible based on maturity of idea, how many users you have, do you have a tech stack? Um, so it depends by program. And some of our programs are writing bigger checks just because they are working with a handful of teams on relatively sophisticated ideas.
And because I mean, science is broad, and every year it seems they push the boundaries of what is possible. How do you determine, with if you don't have a specific donor say, "Hey, Kumar, I want to cure this or do that," and how do you decide where what industry to focus on, what specific challenge that I mean, I thought everybody is getting all the money they want for AI, and here I see that you're providing actually grants in that AI and education space.
Yeah. I think one way to think about, um, yeah, so it is a wide lens, science and tech can cover a lot of things. I think the thing we ask ourselves is, um, whether because ultimately all of our programs basically look like a triangle. It's a 3 to 5 year thesis. What's something we can practically solve within 3 to 5 years? It's a technical lead that's leading the program, and then it's one or more donors that are the anchor donors. So everything
Okay.
looks like that triangle. So one way to think about it is like we're just trying to complete the triangle. We're trying to find a tangible problem, the right lead, and the right donor. And so all the time, the organization is just a set of incomplete triangles. So sometimes the way we find this compelling idea is, some a donor will meet a donor, and the donor has a broad interest, like, oh, I'm
Mm.
interested in mental health. I'm interested in the future of oceans. I'm interested in, you know, uh, catastrophic climate risks. Um, we will then use that as a jumping off point to then say, is there something tangible you could do in 3 to 5 years that is not already going to happen, that's bottlenecked
Ah,
and
okay. So
requires
that's your
additional effort,
guideline. Okay.
So sometimes we start there. Sometimes it's like we talk to a technical expert, and the technical expert says, this is an area where there's huge potential, but no one is building the canonical data set. No one is building these key things that are holding the field back. Or sometimes it's our own instincts based on like, kind of how we see a field developing. But ultimately, we will then use that as the beginnings of then a deep dive to say, okay, is it true that this particular sub area, currently is bottlenecked on this problem? Not enough people are working on it. Additional resources could make a big difference. So there just ends up being a lot of things that are dead ends, they're well
Mm.
resourced or there's not a bottleneck really, it's just like, people are working. There's nothing. Um, but sometimes you do come across things where, you know, additional work would make a huge difference. We're designing a program on can we build a better lead test? So this is like, lead in the environment that can cause, which is a neurotoxin that can
Mm.
cause, knock 10 to 20 IQ points off a kid, just like huge neurological impact. Um, One interesting thing that we found when we looked into it is the whole world is operating on a lead test when we test for lead in the blood that is 40 years old. So it just misses millions of kids. It's not precise enough. And we said like, well, is anybody working on building a better lead test? The answer is no. Like there's, it wouldn't be a hugely profitable market. And so people have not really gone after it, even though it would have this huge amount of social gain to catch a huge number of, because often once we figure out where, if it's in somebody's blood, then we can go find the trace. Oh, it's showing up through spices. Oh, it's showing up through the paint. Oh, it's showing up. But if you don't know that you're having a lead outbreak, how are you going to follow it? And so that's an area where, we think we've done the work. There are diagnostics companies that would work on it if there were resources. Maybe there is a market, maybe not the world's biggest market. So how do we bring that technology along in a way that could create? So the trick is to find problems where, you've there's huge social upside, but for a variety of reasons, market failure, it's underexplored, it's neglected, not enough people are working on it. And you think that use of targeted use of time and money and the right technical lead could make a big difference.
And you say you have a donor, you have a so-called solution, and then you have someone who's kind of the program manager who's
Yeah.
running the show. How do you find all those three? I mean, it's already a task unto itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's in some ways that is our production function. That's like what makes the organization useful. Like, and maybe I, the way I would describe it is like, um, when someone says, well, how do you make a movie? People would say, well, like, well, you need a great script, you need a great director, you need like financing. And you're like, well, how do you start? You find one and then you go look for the other two. Uh, and I think we similarly part of our whole job is to basically, if you think of those things as three circles, just to be in lots of conversations with all three circles. So we talk to lots of donors. So we have a healthy community of donors that we're talking to, so we know what their open interests are. We're talking to lots of people who could be leads, the technical experts, and we're asking them what they're interested in. And we have a running batch of theses where ideas that we're excited about. And we then build systems to find more. So we have this thing called the Big If True Science Accelerator, where we actively do open calls to the research community and say, what's a big
Oh.
idea that you think with 30 to $50 million you could make a big impact on? And we get ideas and we vet those ideas. And then out of that, we'll get new programs that either we will pitch to various government partners to run, or we will ourselves will make them into programs. So on one level, it's like it is hard to put all those things together, but if you get, deep into all those things, then you can start to see the triangles form. Like, oh, we met somebody who's really interested in mental health. We actually met this person who's leaving DARPA, who's really motivated on this topic.
Right.
Oh, and they have this interesting idea. Oh, maybe you can see this coming together. but you have to be in a lot of conversations to see those opportunities come together.
And your geographic focus is just North America or Europe or Asia or global?
Yeah, so we started with most of the staff in the US, but
Mm.
been growing quickly globally. So we have partnerships with the British government,
Oh,
we
okay.
have partnerships with the Japanese government, we have partnerships with the German government, and then we have a budding relationship with the Netherlands
Mhm.
and with South Korea. So we, continue to expand. Um, so our staff ends up being London, DC, New York, Bay Area, but have we have a growing, now we have a couple people in Japan with our growing work there. So yeah, so increasingly global.
And if from the as because I would imagine that more and more donors are looking for a solution that you offer. Sometimes it's non-profit, for-profit, but someone who knows what they're doing and can actually execute, not
Right.
just an aspiration. What is the breakdown? Is it really like 80% is philanthropic and then 5% is investment and others is research?
Yeah, I would say, I don't have the numbers on my
Just
fingertips.
kind of off the top
I
of
would,
my head, I would
yeah,
think that that was
I would say, yeah, most of the money is um, the equivalent of grants. Um, but a number of our programs are writing checks to companies. It just ends up being a small share of the
right.
overall amount because, for a philanthropic entity to fund a company, usually we have to come up with a good public good that they're working
Okay.
on, we would have to
Okay.
fund. And so it's a narrower scope. Sometimes we do what is the equivalent of impact investing, where we're investing into but since we're not chasing a return, we're doing that mostly because that's what the company, wants as the
Mm,
way to raise their capital. Um, but for example, we've been scoping a fund in housing, and a lot of the
mm,
ideas, getting our ideas for, new SaaS products that should exist that help on permitting and that sort of thing. And so it could be that we could write a grant, it could be that we could make an investment, but the whole point of it is it's the public good of how do we get more housing built that we're sort of focused on. And so if a grant was the most best way to help them, like we would do that because we're not we're not really in the business of like surely, there might be things we bet on that maybe give us a return, but the principal goal of is just to drive the impact as quickly as possible. So we'll only do the returns if that is the best way to capture the value.
and your kind of guideline or goalpost is in 3 years you want to see results, or did I misunderstand that 3 years time horizon?
Yeah. So each of the funds will have a time duration. So we usually say 3 to 5 years, but we
Okay.
make them write it down. So like this is a 5-year fund, this is a 3-year fund.
Okay.
So that when we go out to donors, we say, this is the goal, this is the timeline, this is the amount of money we're trying to raise. Like, do you want to be involved? Um, we have some things that are evergreen, like our Bits Accelerator, the one that's looking for new ideas, because we can do that anytime. But um, but most of our actual topical, efforts where we're trying to actually solve a problem, we will put we will write the KPI. This is we want to develop uh, um, a digital tutor for middle school math that can that can double the rate of learning, but be less than $1,000. And we want to, you
Mm.
know, get to that within 5 years, So we try to write what is the goal of the program on a piece of paper where you could then come back and say, well, did it accomplish that or not?
You have a really amazing job because most people struggle to find investment money or donation money. And it seems, maybe I'm exaggerating, it seems you already have that pipeline of donors, and probably those donors tell other people, hey, I just had a great experience with Renaissance Philanthropy. You should speak to Kumar. So you must love going to the office.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we certainly benefit from the track record, having done this kind of work in previous capacities, like when I worked with Eric, when I worked in the government. Um, I will say, like, there's, my encouragement to everybody is that it is it is not that it's like easy, but it's also not impossible. That
Hmm.
my experience with working with donors is that um, people spend a lot of time kind of like in their own head trying to, because they might have, you know, a negative experience, or they might have gotten a no and get frustrated and sort of think like, oh, they sort of understand. But most of most donor capital is sitting in the denominator. People are giving a lot less than if you actually ask them than they want to be. It's just that there's lots of other practical reasons that hold them back. You know, a big one is just they're busy. So I think people estimate um, how much, I compare it to like health and fitness, which
Hmm.
is if you said to somebody, what is your aspiration for how healthy you want to be in your elder years? You know, and are you make, they'll say, oh, this is what my aspiration is. And then you say, well, are you taking steps today to be in that long-term goal? And they say, well, I've got kids to drop off. I've got this going on, that going on. So daily life is the difference between your like aspirational goals and your daily behavior. And, a lot of the money stuff is similar, which is a lot of donors, when you interview them and you say, okay, well, what do you plan? How much do you plan to um, leave for your kids? How much do you plan to consume? And what's
Oh,
left?
okay. So you actually get into that
You know,
whole, oh, wow.
yeah. And then they will say like that number, the like what's left is really large, way larger than people think because, not a lot of people don't want to necessarily saddle their kids with that as like their job dealing with their and so people are all over the spectrum on this, but there's a real range. So that, what's left is often large. And then you say, okay, well, what's your plan between now and, how many cognitive years you have?
Hmm.
And then they'll say, oh, I should really get started and figure this out. But I'm busy, and um, it giving them like a structured way that they can invest against ideas that are really powerful, you know? This is philanthropic, so they're giving the money away, but where they can get excited about the ideas and really scale. I mean, our funds model is meant to be scalable, right? So if you get involved in one fund, you can say, well, what else do you have? Maybe there should be more funds. And so we have found that it's not just the ideas are compelling, but the model is compelling because suddenly you don't need to retire from your day job, become a full-time philanthropist, have a big team. You can actually, maybe you've got a couple people who are helping you, but now through a different funds that exist, you're deploying real money into the world. You're getting to see the impact of it while you're alive, and it's not like changing your day-to-day what you do all day.
Hmm.
It's not, and I think most of the system is designed for professional philanthropists, people who they've decided to retire from their first career and they become a philanthropist and this is their day job. And there's lots of, they have a foundation, they've got a large staff. I think the system is well designed for those people. For people who want to put real resources to work while they're doing something else,
Right.
it's a lot harder. Or people who just want a small team because they prefer a small team.
Sure.
And our sort of view is that the finance world actually gives a good analogy, which is in finance, people have relatively small family offices, but then they deploy through all these investment funds. And
Right.
philanthropy doesn't have that. Philanthropy has been vertically integrated. And so you have all the people you bet on, but then the next level up is you have your foundation. And, you know, like depending on how much money you want to deploy, that's how much staff you need to have. And that's just harder.
And so you have the foundation Renaissance Philanthropy is, let's say, the top co, and each of the projects is in a special purpose vehicle.
It's a good question. So we don't
Sorry to
need
get into the
SPV.
into the
No,
details
no,
about.
no. No, no, it's a great question. We don't need SPVs because uh, the philanthropy slash nonprofit world is just a lot simpler
Okay.
because you don't, the reason why you need SPVs when you're doing investment work is you need to carefully be able to attach the value gain to which investor and what
Okay.
percentage
Right.
give them their returns. Since we don't give any returns back to anybody, we can just treat each of our individual funds as just pods of the organization. They don't need to be separate legal entities. They're just we manage them on our back end as just a P&L and a team lead on our books. But we don't need to create separate entities because
Okay. So it's just a separate
it's just one big profit
project.
organization.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
sometimes you'll probably get people that are super passionate about a subject, whether mental health or education or climate or food or agriculture or transportation. And they want to allocate money, but they want to be super actively involved. I don't know, maybe they're retired and
Yeah.
sometimes, boy, this guy's a real pain in the neck. He's constantly getting involved and not always effectively, which I can imagine can be problematic. Do you say, okay, we just give us your money and we'll report to you, but you're not involved in the project, or you have that functionality also that people can be actively involved? I can connect you with these and get this other organization involved and help scale it.
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say that there's like a failure mode we try to avoid. The failure mode we try to avoid is um, whoever we've recruited as the fund lead doesn't actually get given the ball to drive the work. Because what we
Mm,
say is it's 3 to 5 years. That's not that much time. It's a big goal we've outlined. So we want them to run at full speed because otherwise we're not going to succeed. So what we say is like, look, if you like the idea, you like the thesis, you like the person, and you're writing the check, at that point we consider that the green light. Run as fast as possible, you know, pivot as you need, figure out new information, get the work done. So that's like for us like a non-negotiable, like the program leads have to be able to run at full speed. They don't have to come back and say, mother may I, on each individual decision. But what we do say to the donors is we would love, donors actually have a lot of uh secret knowledge. They know they funded
sure.
other people, they know oh, that person's actually a crook. You shouldn't work with them, or that's
Yeah.
actually a great partner, or, like they just have a lot of knowledge. So we say to the donors, like, tell us what you know, share your expertise, share your knowledge of the field. We will give them the phone number of the fund lead. You can call them up anytime you want. So we treat the donors like special advisors. They can share as much knowledge, input as they want because that'll make us the work smarter. What we say is they don't get decision-making authority, which is that they don't get to make the decision about, oh, I'm going to write a grant to this person, I'm going to do this, all that stuff. They are just like kind of really premier advisors to the fund lead. And we found that that actually works pretty well for people because some people do want to be really involved. They want to learn because maybe they want to build their own foundation someday or grow
Mm.
their own direct work, or they just like the feeling of being involved. But sometimes they actually have a lot of expertise to share. We like that. All that is the one thing that we hold the line to is the program lead is in charge. and they get to actually run at the full speed that the program requires. And so sometimes we do have donors walk away where,
Yeah, I can
you know,
imagine.
they're used to a model in which, they're almost like contracting for services.
Right,
They're like, I make the decision. I just want
right.
you to like kind of do the legwork. And we say like we have great peer organizations we can recommend who are more contract organizations that can do program delivery. We're not a program delivery organization. We design the program, recruit the lead, and run the program. So we hold ourselves quite responsible for the program success. And so if that's not, sort of interest, then it's like fine. We have good peers we can recommend. So for us, involvement is not a problem, but making sure we're aligned with the donor that we're going to drive is important.
And as you're going along, the program lead says, wow, we have this incredible other thing that can kind of roll in. Can we go out and try to raise a bit more money for the project, or is what you start with is what you end with?
Yeah.
I think, oh, okay.
So I didn't do a,
Hmm,
yeah, we try to do a process um, at the beginning when we're trying to design the fund. So we might have a scoping period of the fund where we're
right.
trying to actually write down, here's the goal, here's the money needed. But, sometimes that comes up with like, a little bit more of a graduated ladder, like this is what I need for this goal. But, if I had more resources, we could add 10 more countries and go after this larger version of the goal. Um, so I think we try to keep that in our back pocket. So if, we did have access to re additional resources, could we go further and, raise a larger amount and set a lot, a larger KPI. Um, but the goal is mostly in the other direction. We don't want to get out there with a goal, but not the money to achieve it. So we want to set the goal and the money amount correctly so that, we're not going out there and just sort of like, we think the problem needs $15 million. We've raised 3 million and we just sort of putter it out and then
Mm,
up with nothing because we didn't actually invest. So either if we're trying to do $15 million worth of work, let's raise the 15 million, or let's lessen our ambitions and set a different goal.
okay.
But like the goal and money and alignment should all match up because, my experience, you know, from philanthropy is just that sometimes like programs, they just kind of like they end up in a no man's land, they've raised some money, so they're
Mm,
kind of out there, but they like haven't landed the plane
right.
uh, on the goal that they want requires this much money, but they're not near there. And so we just sort of try to phase it. So we say, okay, look, there's a scoping phase where we're going to design the program. Then we have a next phase where we raise the anchor funding to at least get to an MVP. Then we can raise additional funding. So they can be levels, but each of the levels should make sense.
And each project always has only one, let's say, nonprofit or for-profit that it's funding, or there are various ones involved in a project.
Yeah, usually we will have many grantees and partners.
Oh,
So
okay.
like, like our AI for Math fund, at this point we've probably funded 30 to 40 different
Wow.
research teams.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that the whole
So,
point of a fund is that you can then work with a bunch of organizations. So we have a couple programs that are basically fully in-house where, it's a single engineering team working on working on something. But most of the time we're funding the field. And so we're writing a lot of checks.
I mean, is it the donor that creates the initiative, or is it the donee that creates the idea, hey, we should be doing something in, I don't know, agriculture or logistics or transportation or energy?
I mean, generally we're creating the initiative, as
Oh,
in we're
okay.
saying, like there should be a better lead test, or there should be a digital tutor that is under $1,000 in middle school math. So like we're designing the scope. But
Okay.
now it's not that we're designing it with like no conversation with the field.
No,
We're
okay,
designing
sure, sure.
we're designing the goal by talking to a bunch of people to say what's in that realm of important but not happening right now, but possible. So that Goldilocks zone of ambitious but possible is sort of what we're going for. So that requires a bunch of pre-conversation with the field. Um, and then we will go then fund performers in the field, that are going to then build those technologies or build those innovations because ultimately we're field facing, right? We're not, we're not a company trying to build our own solutions and then we're going to market them. We're going to fund
Right,
people
okay.
who have ideas, um, who either are going to build nonprofits or companies or other things to go after the problem.
And when you decide, okay, let's sort out, let's address whatever agriculture or climate, whatever the
Yeah.
project is, how long does it take from, okay, we got to get a donor, we got a project lead, and we got to find one or more organizations for execution or to fund? How long is that process to get things off the ground?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's partly why we do this phasing. So, a scoping period where we're like just raising enough money to scope what the fund looks like, recruit the
Mhm.
person who could possibly lead the fund and some of that early money.
Mhm.
Scoping efforts are usually 3 months or 6 months or
Okay,
maybe
so
for a
not
really
so
large
long.
fund. So that's like the scoping period. And then the fund itself, will run 3 to 5 years. And so usually during that scoping period, we're also trying to line up the funding for then the fund itself. So, there's like a step ladder. But yeah,
It's not
it's
long.
not meant to be too long.
No.
Because the point is like you should be able to talk to all the field experts, the donors and others and say, do we have enough here to make sense for a fund?
And do you ever approach DAF organizations, donor advised funds, for introductions to potential donors who've already committed the money and the money's there to fund what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we we definitely go out there and try to talk to as many wealth intermediaries that we can find for high quality introductions. I would say that um so for example, we will go meet with all the banks and their wealth
Mm,
advisory slash philanthropic advisory units so they know that we exist.
mhm.
Generally I have found that um m a lot more of our just come through referrals that are from either philanthropic advisory organizations. They work with multiple off families, and then they're looking for, oh, we know you guys work in science and tech.
Mm.
The donor I work with is interested in this area, so sometimes it'll be these specialty shops, and then sometimes it's just the donor, you know, like somebody in their peer network says, oh, you mentioned this. Well, you should talk to them. So, and then we try to be very proactive. Like we have a team that really gets out there because one of the things we've just sort of found is that, this is people find these things hard to talk about. They're
Yeah.
like, how am I supposed to figure this out and all this stuff. And so
Mhm.
if you're more proactive and saying we want to help, people will actually raise their hand and say, well, actually, yeah, I would love help, I would love to figure this out. And so it's been a little bit of a process, but we are always trying to run different experiments. So we built a network of philanthropic advisors we work with. We go to, like I said, we've gone to a lot of the wealth shops. We, we will co host events that we will invite people to so they can learn about the work in kind of a casual setting. And we're up for always doing more experiments. So if there's like, folks are like, oh, uh, you should try this idea as a way to, you know, I talk to folks who are sort of in this emerging wealth category who might be interested in science and tech. We often will then try those experiments as well because our general view is just that just not enough people are working on this. Like so much wealth that's accumulating in the
Yeah,
denominator, the number of people who are actively working on moving the denominator to the numerator, it's just too small. So
yeah.
people are working on their individual ideas, but not that many people are working on the systemic question.
Yeah. Are you surprised that you've made so much progress in such a short time?
I
Or
mean,
are you still hungry?
yeah, I mean, we're definitely surprised. We wrote down our 2-year goal when we started, like this is where we wanted to be, and we are, a good 5x to 10x past that. Because we were like, oh, it's, in the beginning, people are getting to, know you. It's just going to take time to ramp up, and our ramp has been a lot faster. Um, but it's also the kind of the moment we're in where as we've ramped up the number of people we're meeting who need help is like growing, not getting
Yeah,
smaller.
I would
Rather than the
imagine.
pool seeming smaller, it feels. And so I'm very encouraging of people to be taking philanthropy more seriously, to be thinking about philanthropic organizations, and always happy to give advice around people who want to build funds and that sort of thing. Because my general view is like we need a lot more entrepreneurialism on this vector of how do we help more donors deploy more effectively. Like we released a tool recently called Overhang, which is how to use AI as a tool for better giving. Because we're like, oh, like some people are going to be interested in AI tooling as a way to be their philanthropic advisor. We should be thinking about how to make those tools better so people make better decisions. So we're just trying to be as wide as possible so that our general mission of like more money moves from the denominator to the numerator and it moves towards more important things, especially in science and tech, we can sort of
Are
work towards
are
that.
you active in France or Belgium with donors or networks there?
Um, we are starting to do more in continental Europe. So, like I said, we have a partnership with Sprind, which is in Germany,
Mhm.
which is the German innovation agency. We have recently been talking to some of the research consortia in France around doing more in France, and they're interested in sort of like what would a R&D and ARPA model look like in France, um, and have been sort of very interested in kind of building up continental research networks. So yeah, certainly like would be interested. Like I said, you know, um, we have a pretty active conversation going with the Netherlands. Um, so yeah, so we've been sort of growing in this area.
Well, if you need any intro to two women in particular, one, she runs a very low profile organization called Pulse Foundation. Most people never
Mm.
heard of it, but the members are the extremely wealthy European families. So the family that owns the Walmart of France or the Walmart of Belgium, and other really, but very low profile, and it's a very much about entrepreneurship, extremely wealthy. So she's a good person. I'm happy to connect you. And then another friend of mine, she's the global head of impact investing for the mega rich of BNP. It's a huge bank in France. So her clients are the extremely wealthy ones, and she has that relationship, and you're not looking to manage money, so you're not a competitor of them to manage
Oh,
their money.
yeah,
So if you ever want an
yeah,
introduction to those two women, happy to do that.
yeah,
And
that'd be great.
yeah, they're quite, and I know that their clients do quite a bit in philanthropy. Um, so and also in research and science, etc. How can those that are listening to this replay help you?
Yeah, so I think a couple of different ways. I mean, one is just at the funds level, we're pretty active. We have RFPs going on lots of different topics where we're looking for ideas. So, like if you're a researcher, we'll have a newest cohort of the Big If True Science Accelerator launching. You've got your big idea. We would love to hear about it. Um, so one is just, you know, looking at some of our different opportunities and applying. Um, I think the other way is the way that you are just generating ideas with me around, how do we get more folks who might be interested in this model on the giving side involved? Obviously not everybody has those relationships, but we're always happy to chat with
Hmm.
people who are early in their own personal journey or their peers. And then I would say just, um, we're yeah, so I think those are the two big ways, which is if you've got technical ideas and you're
Right.
excited about them, like we might have opportunities to support those technical ideas. And then, of course, if you're on the potential to give side or that's your peer network, we would, of course, love those introductions as well.
Sure. Happy to help. It's a quite a clever model because you're addressing um, innovation that is often really challenged to get funding for that. And you're running it in a professional manner to show results. I know that some give philanthropy like McKinsey's got, here's the money, get on with it. Don't report. I don't need to see milestones. And others create, very specific milestones, but not necessarily delivering on execution, but more in reporting. And you're taking a kind of venture entrepreneurial support mechanism to get things done and manage it properly. So, I mean, really good idea. Really good idea that what you built over there. And I'm sure that a lot of people will,
Yeah.
be happy to knock on your door, and I'm happy to connect you with people that won't waste your time, but will um, could that they would be quite interested in this because you give them a window on the world, on solutions, um, and whether it's medical or education and that. So you're, looking at challenges that exist and coming up with solutions and then putting the pieces together in an efficient, effective manner rather than, oh, well, let's research this to death for the next 10 years. Um,
Right.
and not actually get anything done.
Right.
And yeah,
Yeah. No, I think I'm hoping that, we we can be, obviously we want to be a sector leader, but we can also inspire others into this way of working.
yeah, no, brilliant. Is there anything that we forgot that you feel important to mention? Because when I put when we make the intro and outro, we'll add also a text with link to the organization. But is there anything specifically that you felt is important to mention that we didn't?
Um, it's been a conversation and it's great to be joining you. And then, yeah, I would encourage folks to reach out if they've got ideas.
Fantastic. Let me just stop that.